Kia ora, Internet.
Hello and welcome to the first ever
Sky Bear Games podcast.
episode 1, the Phantom Podcast,
Hopefully it will be better than the Phantom Menace.
the Podcast Menace, something like that. So, who are we?
I'm James.
And I'm Claire.
Are we talking about something about games, or are we talking something about I like cats, or...
It could be both. You like games about cats?
I do. All of my games
yeah.
wind up having a cat in there somewhere.
Oh, all of them. Yeah.
And I'm very interested in role-playing games and in tabletop games, particularly Magic the Gathering, which I've been trying and failing to get out of for the last 20 years.
They keep pulling you back in. Oh.
Every time I get out, they pull me back in.
Oh, it's
that was
so
a
true.
terrible impression.
Yeah, both of us. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. It's charming. It's charmingly bad, right?
That's...
Right, Internet?
Sure.
Please, stroke my ego. I'm Claire, and I write computer games, and I like computer games. I also like tabletop games. I don't write them as much as James does, but wow.
Yeah, I like computer games too, but I don't know as much about them as Claire does.
Good, because they're mine. That's my territory.
I let you into my role-playing sandbox.
Fine. Okay. Good. I'm glad we're agreed. So,
We're hoping to do these podcasts fortnightly, and since this is the first one, we're going to give a little overview of what we've got planned.
we are going to look at news in the gamosphere.
Then we're going to talk about what we've been playing and what we've been making lately. And, you know, I heard a story the other day, week, month, time blurs
Oh, yeah.
at the moment, about somebody talking to some school kids and trying to be hip and down with the kids. Asked, so,
Is this a story about you?
no, though I can see how you'd be confused. They asked how the kids were enjoying Fortnite, and all of these 11-year-olds gave this person a withering look and said, no one plays Fortnite anymore. Oh, what do you play? We play Dungeons and Dragons.
No way.
And the adult had this wave of... And they didn't know that it was something that was old. They thought it was the hot thing.
That is so awesome. I'm so jealous of those 11-year-olds. Because, like, for me, I found D&D at, age 21, 22. I was one of the weird people who DM'd before ever playing, because I got the starter kit and I thought, I really want to try this. I guess I'll DM for my friends, because no one else is keen. I did it. I was really bad at it. And so I looked on the internet to see, where can I play a game in Auckland? Is there someone running a game somewhere in a store? And
It was
spoilers!
me. It was me.
I met my husband.
And now we're married.
I walked in and I was like, whoa, this is the nerdiest guy I've ever met.
She wasn't wrong. As for me, I have been role-playing... I was a GM to start off with too. I have been role-playing for, let's call it
25 years?
20... maybe 27, 28 years.
Whoa!
Starting back with Fighting Fantasy. The game books had the Fighting Fantasy introductory role-playing game.
That is some tasty old school right there.
That was very old school. And I remember doing dungeon crawls for the 7 to 8 year olds. Did you know we're getting really off topic with what we had planned.
That's fine.
Did you know I made my first board game in primary school when I was about 7 or so?
Well, you beat me. I made my first board game in primary school when I was maybe 9 or 10. It was a Third Rock from the Sun themed one.
My one was a card game.
Oh, nice.
And it was, I guess by today's terms, it was a dungeon crawl one. It was set in a forest, and there were cards that you flipped over, and they were what you encountered as you went.
It wasn't the game on a toothpaste tube, was it?
No, that was a later one.
Oh, okay.
That was something else.
Yeah, your mum showed me relics of your childhood one time, and that was something I saw.
No, these were little, matchbox-sized cards.
Oh my god!
And
that's so
on
cool.
one side, I'd drawn pictures of all the things, and so
That's it. No, you've just reminded me. That was something, I did something earlier than when I was 9. I made a Harry Potter card game with my best friend.
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah, I still have it. It's really unbalanced.
Oh, my one. So there were different characters that you could play as, but that didn't mean anything. And each of them had a magic item in the forest that you were looking for. And so you laid out the cards in the forest to make paths, and then you rolled the dice and you moved your character along. And if you landed on a monster, you were dead.
Nice.
And the deck was mostly monsters.
Oh my god.
And there were a few trees. And then there were the cards that you were actually looking for. Later on, I think I added in having dice rolling for combat.
Right.
But in the initial version, if you landed on a monster, that was game.
Yeah.
And you had to go in, find your artifact, and then go out.
Well, was that... So, what, for you, gaming, was that where you started? Was it Fighting Fantasy? Or was it... Wait, no, you had an Amstrad before that, right?
I had an Amstrad, and so that had games like Gauntlet
Yeah.
on it, Jet Set Willy,
Jet Set Willy.
which you've now played on the RetroPie.
It's insane, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do to win.
That sounds like most Amstrad day.
But you know what?
games from back in the day.
I really appreciate the aesthetic. It's all like ASCII art, all really like colourful. I really like it. Yeah, so for me, I had a Commodore 64. That was my first gaming PC, and fond memories.
Yeah, for me it was the Amstrad, and then in primary school getting introduced to the Fighting Fantasy books, which were huge in the 80s. And then after them, the Lone Wolf books, which,
Very
they've had a
formative for you.
big impact on me. Yeah. And then from there, the event that single-handedly turned me into a nerd was when there was an event I can
go on.
I was 6 years old, and at my primary school, we had a performer come to visit called Eddie the Drummer.
Oh, yeah.
And you could go to see Eddie the Drummer.
I don't think I've... No, I have heard this
You
story.
have heard
Go
the
on,
story.
go on.
You could go to see Eddie the Drummer, or you could go to the library and they'd play a movie. And I don't remember why, but I did not go to see Eddie the Drummer. I went to the library to see the movie, and it was the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings movie.
Oh, wow.
And, well, the last time I saw that was in university, and I thought it was terrible.
Yeah,
but back when
yeah.
I was 6, that thing blew my mind.
Of course. It was.
Absolutely blew my mind. But we didn't finish the whole movie.
Oh, no.
And I had to know what was going to happen next. So I went to the public library and I said, I think there's a book about this.
Oh.
And they hooked me up with the good stuff.
Okay.
And so from there, I read The Lord of the Rings, I read The Hobbit, I read the Narnia books, all the fantasy that was available back in the 80s. And then I read the Dragonlance novels. And at the back of the Dragonlance novels, there was an advertisement saying, did you enjoy these? You can play a game where you are these characters.
Oh, yeah.
And I went, this is amazing. And so I remember we went on holiday to the UK, and we didn't have game stores in New Zealand back then, or if we did, they were somewhere I didn't know where they were. But we went over to the UK for Christmas, we went to a game store, and we found this box set right here, Tales of the Lance.
AD&D.
AD&D 2nd edition.
All right.
Then I found the fine text in it saying, you need these 3 other books to be able to use this.
Wait. Were you still in the UK when you found it? Oh, thank goodness.
Yes. So we went and we found copies of the Player's Handbook and the DMG, and we never actually found a copy of the Monster Manual.
Huh. But we now have 2 copies of the AD&D Monster Manual somewhere, don't we?
Somewhere.
Because you have one and I have one.
Anyway, that was when I was, 10 or 11.
Right.
And that was when I discovered that there was this thing beyond just Fighting Fantasy, that there was something even more. Fighting Fantasy, if you haven't played it, character creation involves rolling 4 dice. That's it. You have 3 stats, you roll 4 dice, and you've made your character. And then off you go. And so this opened my mind completely. There's this whole other thing out there, and it's big and complicated and interesting. And then for the last 25 years since then, I have been struggling to find other people who have corresponding schedules.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is that we have a lot of actor friends, and Yeah, I mean, things have calmed down a little bit with Corona. Really? Calm down?
Really?
Not quite. But, you know, we've
Really,
had a little
that's
bit of
made
game.
scheduling even more difficult.
In times, yeah. And having our first child has, made the gaming has been second priority to him.
But now that our lockdown is over here in New Zealand, we are able to start gaming in person again. And so we had a few games that we ran online during the lockdown, but we've started up properly again. I've finally got back to my home game, one of my home games.
You finished one of them.
I finished one of
You
them
finished one that had been going for
over a year.
over a year.
Not going for over a year, but more like
Stalling.
stalling for over a year. Finished one of them, had another session for one that had been stalling for about 6 months. Am hoping to restart the third one very soon too.
My nerddom origins. I can think, just over this conversation, I can think of a couple of sort of stars in the constellation, if you will. I realised, actually, this is slightly embarrassing perhaps, the very beginning was as a fan fiction writer. Sailor Moon and Pokemon. I wrote fan fiction at 6 till about 10 or 11. And then the other sort of side of it is discovering computer games and video games. So obviously the Commodore 64, but then when my cousins had a PlayStation, oh my god, they were early adopters of PlayStation 1 back when it was just called the PlayStation. So two of the most like formative games in my psyche are Tomba or Tombi. It's known as different names depending on what region you live in. It's just a cute little sort of Japanese 2D platformer that I can clock it in 3 hours straight now. I know the game off by heart. I could probably play it in my mind just with my imagination. That's how well I know that game. And other sort of half of my gaming diet around that same time was introduced to me by my Korean best friend in primary school, elementary school for you Americans, Princess Maker 2. So really sort of crazy diverse.
Now, you tried to get me to play Princess Maker 2 just recently, and I failed miserably, so that was fun.
You know what? I will put it to the Steam has... Their port of it is old school and weird, and I don't like it. There was an unofficial English translation that has been available illegally on the web for yonks, right? And that is the one that I was playing from, like, about 10 years old. So it is something I realised quite recently about myself is when I'm making computer games, who is my client? Who am I actually writing for? And I realised, 10-year-old Claire. That's who I'm making games for. So... with that knowledge, I sort of come to better accept myself as a designer.
I mean, likewise for me, Magic the Gathering was something that I first got into in primary school. And back in Revised Edition, I'm still trying not to spend money on it and failing.
I mean, you were actually doing really well until we started dating. And then you took me along to the game store, and I was like, oh god, it's Magic, that thing that my ex-boyfriend scared me off of by being a really overly aggressive player and laughing when he won against me, even though, like, obviously I was hugely inexperienced. But then I started looking through the cards, and I was like, ooh, what's this Cards of Tarkir thing? This is a really cool setting. It's, you know... sort of, in some ways, it reminded me of Game of Thrones in that you have these different sort of clans, these different tribes. And I was really into it and I wanted to know more. And then we collected the whole damn set because we're crazy.
One of our formative first dates was back in the original Theros block.
Oh.
Where they had a challenge called the Hero's Path, where there were special promo cards that you could unlock by doing challenges. There were 3 challenges per set in that block.
Good times.
And they culminated in taking on sort of like an NPC deck. It was a challenge deck that ran itself. And so I made an Elspeth themed deck. She was the main character of that storyline. I made a themed deck based around her, and I did the first 8 challenges following that story. I had a great time with it. And then I met Claire and we started dating. And very early on, I said, well, there's this game that I play, and the final challenge is coming. And would you like to take part in it? And we can team up to fight it together. And I've got a deck that's themed around the main character. But she's just made a best friend, and he's a cat.
Ajani!
So I whipped together an Ajani themed deck out of my commons and uncommons that I had lying around, and pulled a few cards out of my own deck, filled up my deck with what I thought was rubbish, and accidentally made a combo that resulted in us winning the game with
was it?
56 million life, was it?
Yeah, you had 56 million life. I only had like 100 and something. You know, because I had the 100 life Ajani. His ultimate planeswalking ability was 100
Gain
life.
100 life.
Yeah.
Which normally sounds very impressive, but when you're dealing with the millions of life,
But
it
you
felt like a rounding error.
You had 56 million life because you had this thing which doubled your life gain each time, right? But
Yes.
your guy who did that, the little creature out there on the battlefield in front of you, had twice that amount of life.
So what I had was I had a 1/1 creature with a life link, and he had an enchantment on him that said that every time I gained life, he got that many +1/+1 counters, which meant next time he would be gaining me twice as much life and then doubling his power every time. And I just threw the cards in because they fit the theme, and I didn't even realise I'd made the combo.
What you gonna do? What you
What you
gonna
gonna do? Anyway, that was hilarious and hysterical, and that was the
And
beginning
that-
of our
yeah.
relationship with Magic and also with each other.
That's a bit of romance for you. You're welcome.